Today is Monday, November the 15th, and many are joining me for the first time in our study. This is a chronological study of God's Word over a 2-year span. I began January the 1st, 2021. We are now in the 11th month and halfway through the 11th month of our first year. Now we are continuing today our study in the Book of Proverbs. The title, A Stingy Soul and A Virtuous Woman. Proverbs chapter 11 and Proverbs 12. Now let's notice Proverbs chapter 11. We're only going to look at 3 verses in this wonderful chapter in the Book of Proverbs. Now, the title of this particular devotional is You Poor, Stingy Old Soul. And it's taken from Proverbs 11, 24, 25, and 26. Now, as you study through the scriptures with me, I hope that you will take the time to read the whole chapter of Proverbs 11 and Proverbs 12 today. But for Proverbs 11, we're going to look at verses 24, 25, and 26. And there is a familiar New Testament principle that we find here in the Old Testament, and it is that principle of sowing and reaping. To put it in another way, as you look at Proverbs 11, 24, 25, and 26, we not only reap what we sow, we also reap in proportion to how much we sow. Proverbs 11, verse 24. There is that scattereth or disperses, the idea of dispersing seed, and yet increaseth. There is that withholds the seed more than is meet, more than is necessary, but it tendeth to poverty. Now consider an illustration with me, because so much of the book of Proverbs has an agricultural background. Well, consider a farmer. In springtime, a farmer has some very important decisions to make. He must decide the crops he's going to plant in light of the harvest he plans to reap. He must also consider how much he hopes to gather and store up for winter. In other words, he must determine the amount of seed to plant in the springtime in order to reach his goal of the harvest in the fall. Now, by contrast, a foolish farmer might would hoard the seed and fail to value the potential life and multiplication represented in one seed. After all, insects and mold can get in and ruin the seeds that you, a farmer, might would hoard and store. And so for a farmer to withhold and reserve seed, which is the potential of life, does indeed, as we read in this verse here, verse 23, tend to poverty. Now, what is the application for believers? Because we know this isn't about farming. It is this: a believer who hoards his talents and his gifts and fails to be a steward of God's grace and blessings is like a farmer who hoards his seeds. Let's look at that application in 2 arenas. The first is a financial one, and the second is the area of our stewardship of ministry talents and opportunities. There are believers who hoard wealth and are blind to their responsibility to invest in God's work and ministry. Some leave a great inheritance to their children, but they enter heaven as spiritual paupers. What a tragedy! To have the means to be a blessing, but elect to withhold for the Lord, His church, and His servants more than is meet, more than is necessary. Now Solomon continues that lesson in verse 25, and it continues this study of stewardship. Look at verse 25. The liberal soul. Now that means the blessed or the prosperous soul. The prosperous life, the heart, shall be made fat. The idea of being satisfied or prosperous. And he that watereth shall be watered also himself. Now what's Proverbs 11:25 teaching? That there is joy and satisfaction that comes to the man who is generous with what God has entrusted to him. As God's people, we are merely conduits of His blessings. And when we give the overflow of our lives to the Lord, that is, we give our time, our talents, and our gifts to serve the Lord and be a blessing to others, He promises we will never want. Now, Proverbs 11 and verse 26. He that withholdeth, there it again is the idea of being one that is hoarding grain. He that withholdeth corn, that is wheat. The people shall curse him, but blessing shall be upon the head of him that selleth. I've often wondered why men and women of wealth waited to their deaths to be a blessing to others. Why withhold a blessing when it is in your ability to give? Why hoard more than you need when you have it in your power to be a blessing? Why watch your church and other ministries struggle when you have been blessed with the means to be a source of joy and satisfaction? Warning, a stingy soul will be cursed. And then we go to Proverbs chapter 12, looking only at one verse, and the title of this one verse would be this: Womanhood extols the best and the worst of human character. Proverbs 12 and verse 4. A virtuous woman, that is a morally pure, a good woman, is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. In other words, a wife who makes her husband ashamed is like a cancer to himself. The scriptures address various kinds of women throughout its pages. From Eve, the mother of humanity, who entertained the beauty of forbidden fruit, to the Virgin Mary, who, though of a humble means, was chosen as the mother of Jesus, God's only begotten Son. Womanhood does extol the best and the worst of humankind. Our culture tends to idolize women who personify infamous qualities that only a half century ago would have been scandalous. Sadly, women who epitomize the best character qualities are seldom noted or praised by family or peers. A virtuous woman is a woman of godly character. She is morally upright, faithful to her husband, worthy of the praise of her family and her friends. A virtuous woman brings out the best in her husband, and she is a joy and delight to her children. I have a closing thought for you. Have you set your heart to love the Lord and to aspire to the highest virtues? What is your reputation at school, at work, in your neighborhood, and at church? Proverbs 12:4 is a lesson for every man and should be noted, and every woman should heed. Thank you for joining me on this Monday, November the 15th. Bye-bye.